The night was warm for Memphis in the spring of 1968. The kind of warm that doesn't announce itself. It simply settles, pressing against the windows of Graceland like a hand laid flat against glass. Inside, the house was quiet in the way that only very large houses can be quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of space, of rooms that went unused, of hallways that carried footsteps from somewhere far away and delivered them changed, softened, almost unrecognizable. Priscilla Presley was 22 years old. She sat in the upstairs bedroom she shared with her husband, a bedroom that had been decorated to his specifications, with his colors and his furniture and his particular sense of what comfort should look like. Lisa Marie was asleep in the nursery down the hall, 8 weeks old, still new enough to the world that her presence felt like a held breath, something fragile and enormous at the same time. Priscilla had fed her an hour before, had stood at the nursery window afterward watching the grounds of Graceland stretch out into the dark, the famous gates invisible from up here, the outside world invisible too. She was waiting for Elvis. He was due back from Los Angeles. Another film, another set of weeks in which he had been there and she had been here, navigating the rhythms of new motherhood inside a house that felt simultaneously like a palace and a cage. She was used to waiting. She had been waiting for something, for a shape to settle over the life she had chosen since she was 14 years old and had looked up at a party in Bad Nauheim, Germany, and found a famous man looking back at her with eyes that saw too much and not quite enough. 8 years had passed since that night. 8 years in which she had remade herself, willingly at first and then with growing unease, into the woman Elvis needed her to be. The dark hair piled high, the heavy eye makeup that she had worn since she was 17 because he preferred it, the particular way she moved through his world, accommodating, present, carefully composed. She had learned his rhythms the way you learn the rhythms of weather, not because you can control them, but because your survival depends on reading them correctly. She had done everything right, and something, in the weeks since Lisa Marie's birth, had shifted. She couldn't name it precisely. That was the particular cruelty of it. The shift was real, but its edges were unclear. The way the boundary between water and sky blurs in certain kinds of light. Elvis had come to see her after the birth, had held their daughter with a tenderness that took her breath away. He had cried. She had seen him cry, and it had made her love him in a way that was almost painful. A love that felt like pressing on a bruise. He was capable of that. He was capable of that depth of feeling, but something had changed. In the weeks since Lisa Marie's arrival, Elvis had become, she searched for the word and could not find the right one. Present but distant, loving but somehow removed. He called from Los Angeles every night, and the calls were warm and full of news about the film and questions about the baby, but they lacked something she had trouble identifying until one evening she realized they lacked the heat that had always been there before, the particular quality of his attention that made her feel seen. It was as if a frequency had shifted just slightly outside the range she could hear. She heard the car on the gravel below. She didn't move from her position on the edge of the bed. She listened to the sounds she had memorized over years of this same sequence. The engine cutting, the door, the voices of the Memphis Mafia boys who traveled everywhere with him, the particular cadence of his footsteps on the stairs. She had always been able to identify Elvis by his footsteps alone. There was a weight to them, a certain deliberateness, as if each step was considered. The bedroom door opened. He looked good. He always looked good coming off a film. Tanned, his hair perfectly styled, wearing the casual clothes that somehow always looked like a costume on him, as if Elvis Presley could not simply exist in jeans and a shirt without the jeans and shirt becoming part of the performance. He saw her on the bed and smiled, and the smile was real. That was never in question. Elvis Presley did not fake warmth. It was one of the things she had understood about him from the beginning. He was incapable of genuine dishonesty about feeling. He felt things too much for that. What he was capable of was silence. of not saying things, of letting the things that mattered most accumulate behind his eyes while his mouth spoke about other things entirely. "Hey, Seela." He crossed the room and sat beside her, kissed her forehead. He smelled of the particular cologne he'd always worn, of airplane and long hours. "How's our little girl?" "Sleeping," Priscilla said. "She had a good day. I missed her." He leaned back against the headboard, stretching his long frame across the bed, closing his eyes for a moment. "I missed both of you." She believed him. That was never the question. What she wanted to ask, what she had been practicing asking for 3 weeks, assembling the words and then taking them apart and assembling them differently, was something harder, something that required a kind of courage she was still working out how to access. She said it anyway. "Things are different between us." He opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." A silence. Not a comfortable one. The kind of silence that has weight and shape that you can feel pressing against your skin. "I'm tired, Seela." "I know you are. I'm tired too." She kept her voice even. She had learned this from him, actually. The power of a quiet voice, of words delivered without performance. It was one of the things they had in common, somewhere beneath all the difference and the difficulty. A preference for truth spoken softly over drama. "But that's not what I mean, and you know it." He sat up, looked at her with that particular expression she had learned to read over years. Not evasion exactly, but the look of someone approaching something they didn't know how to approach. Elvis had spent his entire adult life performing. The performance was so total, so complete, that it had overwritten some of the machinery of ordinary communication. He could project feeling to the back of a stadium, one-on-one, in a quiet room, with a woman who could see past the performance. That was harder. "You're the mother of my child," he said finally, as if this were an explanation. Priscilla looked at him for a long moment. "That's what you've been thinking." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She had been with him long enough to understand the architecture of his silences, what they contained, what they were protecting. She had read, somewhere, in some fragment of conversation or half-heard comment from the women who moved through the periphery of Elvis's world, that he divided women, that there were women he desired and women he revered, and that marriage for him had a way of moving a woman from one category to the other. She had not understood when she was younger what this meant. She had thought love was love, that it was not divided into categories, that a man who loved you whole. She understood it now. She understood it in the particular quality of his distance, in the way he touched her forehead when he meant something else, in the careful tenderness that had replaced the heat. He loved her. He loved her absolutely, in a way that was genuine and deep and would not waver. But something had rearranged itself inside him at the sight of her holding their daughter, and the rearrangement had moved her, in his mind, into a category of women he protected rather than pursued. He had done this without deciding to. She understood that too. That was the hidden truth of their marriage, the one that existed in the space between all the official versions, the wedding photographs, the interview quotes, the careful public narrative of the king and his queen. The truth was not cruel. It was not simple. It was something more difficult than either cruelty or simplicity. It was the particular shape of a man who had grown up too fast in too strange a world, who had loved his mother with an intensity that the psychologists would later write about at length, who had never quite learned to hold in the same hands the things he loved most and the things he wanted most. "I'm still me," Priscilla said quietly. "I know that. I didn't stop being me when I had Lisa Marie." He looked at her then with something that was not guilt exactly. Elvis almost never felt guilty in the ordinary sense, but with a kind of recognition, as if she had named something he had felt but not articulated. "I know," he said again. "Then you need to decide what you want to do with that." She said it without anger, without ultimatum. She had learned, in the years of living beside the most famous man in the world, that ultimatums bounced off him without leaving marks. He was too accustomed to people accommodating him, too surrounded by agreement for confrontation to penetrate. What reached him was truth. Quiet, specific, unemotional truth. He looked at his hands. He did this when he was thinking. Dropped his gaze to his hands as if the answer might be written there in a language he hadn't learned to read yet. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "You're not losing me. I'm right here. I've been right here. I know. You've been the one who's somewhere else." He flinched. It was small, barely perceptible, but she had been watching him for 8 years, and she caught it. "I don't do it on purpose," he said. "You know that." "I know." She did know. That was perhaps the most complicated part. He was not doing this to hurt her. He was doing it because of something that lived so deep inside him that he could not access it, or interrogate it, or change it by deciding to. He had been shaped by things, by the mother who had been everything, by the poverty and the sudden fame, by the particular crucible of becoming Elvis Presley at the age of 20, that had left marks she could see but not reach. She was not angry with him. She was something more complicated than angry. She was someone who loved a man she could not fully reach, and who was beginning to understand that this was not a temporary condition. He reached out and took her hand. His hands were large and warm, and she had memorized them the way she had memorized his footsteps, by feel, by weight, by the particular quality of his grip. He held her hand the way he always had, carefully, as if she were something he might break. "I'll be better," he said. She nodded. She believed him, in the sense that she believed he meant it. She was less certain he would succeed. The thing inside him that divided women into categories he revered and women he desired, that was not a decision, and it could not be reversed by deciding. But she loved him. She loved him in a way that had survived 8 years and a transformation of her entire self, and the particular loneliness of being the wife of a man whose loneliness was deeper than anyone else's. She loved him enough to stay, to try, to sit beside him in the warm Memphis dark and hold his large hand and believe, for that moment at least, that they were working toward something. "I know," she said. They sat together for a long time without speaking. Outside, the Graceland grounds lay quiet under a moon that had risen without anyone noticing. Down the hall, Lisa Marie slept in her nursery, 8 weeks old, already famous without knowing it, already the child of a marriage that had more mystery than myth and more love than most people would ever believe. Elvis did not let go of her hand. She did not pull it away. In the morning, he would be up before her, out in the driveway with the boys, and the ordinary machinery of his life would reassert itself, and the conversation would not be directly continued because this was also part of the pattern. The truth would be named, and then life would move on, and the naming would be enough for a while, until it wasn't. But that was the morning. For now there was this. 2 people in a warm room in Memphis, holding hands in the dark, with the weight of what they had not said and could not solve hovering somewhere above them, and the weight of what they shared, the love, the child, the 8 years, holding them together anyway. The years that followed would test every seam of what they had built. Elvis's health would begin its slow decline. His dependence on prescription medication would deepen. The films would lose their audience, and the loneliness that had always been the true interior of his life would press harder against its walls. Priscilla would find, in a karate studio, a man who looked at her with the uncomplicated desire she had been missing, and that looking would eventually end the marriage. Would end it on a morning in 1972 when she sat across from Elvis at Graceland and told him the truth with the same quiet voice she had always used, and watched him try to understand something that was beyond his ability to understand. The divorce would be final on October 9, 1973, his 38th birthday. But what most people remember about the Elvis and Priscilla story, what gets photographed and repeated and turned into myth, misses the texture of what it actually was. It was not simply the king and his queen, the beautiful couple who had it all and lost it. It was 2 people who found each other in a strange country, and made a promise that neither of them fully understood, and who spent years discovering what the promise actually meant. She was 14 when they met. He was 24. He saw in her something that he recognized, a quality of watchfulness, of old eyes in a young face. And he was not wrong. She was watchful. She had been watching him for 8 years by the time she sat on that bed in Graceland and told him the truth about what was happening between them. And her watching had made her understand him perhaps more completely than he understood himself. The hidden truth of their marriage was not the control, though the control was real. It was not the loneliness, though the loneliness was constant. The hidden truth was something quieter and harder, that Elvis Presley loved Priscilla Presley with a completeness that he was constitutionally unable to translate into the ordinary sustenance of a marriage. He loved her into a category of the sacred, and the sacred for him existed at a distance. She never stopped being the girl in the doorway. He never stopped being the man who had seen her there and crossed the room. Those two people existed inside the marriage like a second marriage, purer, simpler, more durable than the legal one. After Elvis died in August of 1977, Priscilla flew to Memphis to see him. She stood in the room where he lay, with their daughter, in the quiet that falls over a house when it has held someone for the last time. "You look so peaceful, Satin," she whispered. "So rested." She told him not to cause trouble at the pearly gates. She was smiling when she said it. "He was the love of my life," she would say in the years that followed, in interviews and memoirs and in the long work of preserving what he had been. Not the king, the man, the one who had looked at her across a room in Germany when she was 14 years old and treated her like someone who mattered. "I never had any desire to marry after him. No one could ever match him." She never remarried. In 1968, in a warm bedroom in Memphis, on a night that no camera recorded and that no one else would ever know about, Priscilla Presley told her husband a quiet truth and held his hand in the dark. Elvis listened. He held on. He said he would be better. He meant it. And what she knew, what she had always known, what she could not unknow, was that meaning it and doing it were two different things, and that she loved him enough to stay anyway, for as long as she could. That is the marriage. Not the photos, not the wedding, not the divorce. That is the marriage. Two people in a warm room, telling each other the truth as gently as they could manage, holding on,